Madam Speaker, my job as an independent representative is to bring the voices, concerns and hopes of my wonderful community of Johnston into this chamber and to play my part along with all of you in making good law and good decisions for the whole of the Northern Territory. That's why I've been looking forward to seeing this CLP government's first budget, to understand what they prioritise, how they plan to spend our money and what kind of future they're trying to build. Because, Mr Deputy Speaker, the economy is not separate from the health of our society, it's a reflection of it. And the budget is one of the most powerful tools we have to shape that collective future. A budget is more than numbers on a page, it's a moral document. It tells us who matters. It shows us whose needs will be met and whose will be ignored or delayed. That's why I rise today to call for a people-centred budget. Not as a soft alternative to economic responsibility, but as the most strategic, effective and future-focused way to build a stronger, fairer Northern Territory. Because, Mr Deputy Speaker, people are the economy. But this budget risks repeating the mistakes of the past, prioritising private industry profits over economic growth for everyone, relying on incarceration over prevention, and once again sidelining the communities most affected, especially Aboriginal people who are disproportionately impacted by these policies, yet rarely consulted on them. Too often we hear of consultation after decisions have already been made, and this budget is no exception. There can be no lasting change, no safety, no justice, no true economic growth without the meaningful inclusion of Aboriginal people in decision-making, design and leadership. We cannot build a strong economy on broken systems, burned-out workforces or communities that are left behind. We build it by making sure that people are safe, housed, educated, healthy and included so that they can contribute, innovate and lead. There are parts of this budget to welcome, such as the gambling tax, spending on housing and domestic violence, a boost for the health budget and the rejection of the notion of austerity. But it remains at its core a budget of missed opportunities and misdirected priorities. Mr Deputy Speaker, this government has called this the law and order budget, and we're told that it puts victims first. But when nearly $1.5 billion is allocated to public order and safety, more police, more prison beds and longer sentences, it doesn't look like a budget centred on victims. It looks like a budget obsessed with incarceration rather than transformation. More prison beds are not a sign of success, they are a symptom of failure. Failure to invest early, failure to heal trauma, failure to listen to the communities most affected by violence and disadvantage, especially Aboriginal communities who are shamefully and devastatingly overrepresented in this government's punitive response, and failure to do what will work to make all of us safer. Mr Deputy Speaker, we know we cannot imprison our way to a safer territory. That's a political illusion. Real safety, as I said, comes from housing, healing, jobs and justice. We're being asked to spend more than $500 million on prison infrastructure and operations, largely in response to policies introduced months ago, rush bail laws, new offences and cuts to community-led prevention programs. And let me be very clear, this is not a proactive investment in community safety. This is the cost of decisions made without evidence, without proper scrutiny and without meaningful consultation with Aboriginal leaders, community leaders, organisations and communities who have been calling for a different path. Decisions that are now costing us millions of dollars. And for what? Crime has not gone down. People are not safer. Prisons are more crowded, more dangerous and more expensive. We already know what drives crime, we know what the root causes are, yet this budget offers little more than token responses to them and instead pours millions of dollars into what will make things worse. Instead of funding what works, housing, mental health services, youth development, culturally safe programs, we're spending hundreds of millions to entrench the cycle of incarceration while we're fining families, evicting vulnerable people into homelessness and passing laws designed to disproportionately target, control, harm and disempower Aboriginal Territorians, causing the greatest harm to those with the least power. We send people into prison with trauma and release them with more, and then we act surprised when they reoffend. Mr Deputy Speaker, we cannot build justice on foundations of harm. We need to fund healing, not just punishment. Investing in prevention and early intervention, in community support, in trauma-informed services, in restorative justice is not only more humane, it's smart, it's cost-effective, and it will actually do something to make us safer. Mr Deputy Speaker, where is the vision in this budget? It's really welcome to see a continued and extended commitment to funding responses to domestic, family and sexual violence, which we all know is the crime crisis in the Northern Territory. I want to acknowledge that the government has committed $36 million per year ongoing to address this issue. Mr Deputy Speaker, I understand from the Minister that this is all new money, and that's a positive and welcome step forward. It's a good story, and it's one that reflects the importance of investing in the right areas for our most vulnerable. In particular, the expansion of the co-responder model, the specialist courts, and the increase in funding for frontline services and men's behaviour change programs are important and much needed additions. This will help ensure the sustainability of our domestic, family and sexual violence sector. So it's definitely a step in the right direction, but several key sector asks have not been considered, were not funded or have even been defunded. This includes no funding being allocated to a domestic, sexual and family violence peak, a loss of funding for some early intervention programs, and no commitment or alignment with the coroner's recommendations, with many of the coroner's recommendations, including the death review. One area of concern is the lack of evaluation for programs like Circuit Breaker. This is a program that the CLP consistently refers to as an example of what they're doing to address the root causes of crime and supporting young people, but we have no information on whether it's actually working to do that. If there has been an evaluation of this program, can this please be made public so that we can see that it is working as intended or meeting the needs of our communities? It's also important to note that Circuit Breaker is not a domestic, family and sexual violence early intervention program. It falls under Child Protection and Corrections, which means that it cannot and should not be funded at the expense of specialist domestic, family and sexual violence services. And in fact, the welcome introduction and expansion of initiatives like this and the co-responder programs will likely increase demand on frontline services. And I'm concerned that these services are not adequately resourced to manage this potential growth. And I also have concerns about the sustainability of programs that continue to be funded year by year without long-term security. The Minister has said that she's working with the sector to identify what works and what doesn't, but it's unclear what process this government is using to work with the sector. Given that the Domestic, Family and Sexual Violence Advisory Forum, which did play that role, has been dissolved, what methodology is guiding decisions about what works? Who's involved in those decisions? We want to make sure that whatever we do here, however we spend our money, actually works to make our community safe, to keep our women and children safe. We must have evidence-based approaches that we properly evaluate. We must invest in community-controlled organisations that are trusted and proven to make a difference. As I said, we're yet to see any funding allocated for a domestic, family and sexual violence specific peak body, something that exists throughout the rest of Australia, which would serve as a vital advocacy and coordination mechanism and make sure that what we're doing, everything works together consistently to the same end. And there's also still no clear commitment or response to the recommendations from the Domestic, Family, Sexual Violence Coronial Inquest. There's no commitment, as I said, to the death review. We're missing critical pieces that could ensure long-term, essential, systemic change that ensures we're not left picking up the pieces, but we're actually addressing the issues before they happen. If we don't listen and act deeply and consistently to organisations, to those with expertise, to those on the front line, then we're not serious about ending this crisis. We're not even really managing it. The CLP calls this a budget of confidence and growth, driven by gas, mining, defence and tourism. But, Mr Deputy Speaker, confidence for whom and growth for whom? This economic strategy leans heavily on fossil fuels and private sector mega projects, facilitating huge profits for offshore companies while downplaying environmental risks, social inequality and community consent. What happens when this growth excludes our most marginalised, when water, land and housing needs are cast aside in favour of short-term industry deals, when Aboriginal communities are consulted after the fact? And while we hear promises of jobs, the budget offers little for local procurement reform, limited youth employment initiatives and no new Aboriginal employment targets in the public sector. If we want a resilient, sustainable economy, we must invest in people, not just projects. Mr Deputy Speaker, the government speaks of fiscal responsibility, trimming operating expenses and cutting consultancies, and I welcome that. But let's be clear, repairing the bottom line must not come at the cost of essential services. We've heard the government ask agencies to find $20 million in annual savings. In the past, similar targets have quietly resulted in fewer frontline workers, reduced program delivery and the erosion of community-based supports, particularly in regional and remote areas. And where is the investment in our community sector, which is not just social support, but is a major employer and the backbone of the economy in remote areas? We know that in the Territory, over 11% of our workforce is in the community services sector. That's larger than in mining or in construction, but this sector is stretched thin, underfunded, under-resourced and struggling to retain staff. Just on Tuesday in this chamber, the government passed a bill which repealed community sector portable long service leave, a bill which would work to attract and retain community sector workers here in the Northern Territory. Mr Deputy Speaker, a people-centred budget would treat the community sector not as charity but as a critical economic infrastructure. It would fund service delivery at real cost, accounting for inflation, workforce pressures and regional complexity. It would co-design a territory-wide workforce strategy to build and retain skilled workers, and it would invest in wages, professional development and career pathways, particularly for Aboriginal people and people working remotely. When we invest in this sector, we're not just funding the people who look after all of us, we're creating jobs, reducing employment and building long-term community capability. Because fiscal sustainability is only meaningful if it sustains the people who rely on public services every day. Mr Deputy Speaker, I welcome the support for families in this budget, back to school vouchers, utilities caps and housing grants. And I'm also pleased to see continued funding for the NT concession scheme. However, it's disappointing that eligibility for this scheme has not been expanded to include people on some of the lowest incomes in our community, such as those on job seeker and youth allowance. And while positive, all these policies are band-aids on structural problems. There's no offer of systemic fix to rental affordability. There's no strategy for food security in remote communities, and there's no comprehensive plan to expand social housing stock. The freeze on registration costs is welcome, but again, supports to address the cost of living are not targeted at those who need them most. Similarly, while continued Commonwealth funding for the Housing Energy Upgrade Fund and the Solar Grant Scheme is a step forward, the absence of new Northern Territory Government investment in renewable energy is a missed opportunity for all of us. Targeted investment in energy efficiency and solar for social housing and rentals would not only reduce living costs for disadvantaged Territorians, it would help future-proof our energy systems and accelerate our shift to sustainability. And yes, grants for first home buyers are welcome, but they also risk inflating prices while ignoring the rental crisis and community housing needs. Ultimately, Mr Deputy Speaker, a people-centred budget is not a luxury, it's a precondition for long-term prosperity for us here in the Northern Territory. We cannot build an economy on prisons and on poverty. We cannot build workforce participation without housing or regional development without trust. We cannot grow our private sector while neglecting the human infrastructure that keeps communities together. And we certainly can't reduce debt if we keep funding failure, spending billions on the costs of crisis, the physical and psychological harm our society experiences, while refusing to invest in the things that would prevent it in the first place. A smarter path is possible, one grounded in community-led solutions rather than top-down command, in evidence-based policy rather than political optics, and in meaningful ongoing consultation with Aboriginal people, not just tick-boxing after decisions have already been made. Because, Mr Deputy Speaker, the cheapest, smartest and most effective way to build a stronger territory is to put people, all people, at the centre of every decision we make. Thank you.
Thank you, Member for Johnston.